Hey, good to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you. I got your book here. Awesome, by the way.
Yes.
I read a ton of books, or I have over the last 4 or 5 years, and I love books that are just to the point. They don't have a lot of fluff, 300 pages that could have been 100 type thing. So kudos to you. This is a really well written book in my eyes, just because the flowed very nicely and it was easy to read. I finished the book probably read over a week period of time at night. So it was good. So we'll get into some of that stuff. But anyways, congrats on the book launch.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think you'll appreciate this that it took time to make it shorter, but I think it was worth it.
Yeah. Well, that's always the thing. It's like good writers versus great writers. I always find, at least from all the research I do and things I watch online, it's like if you make it shorter, like that's how you become a better writer. It's not about length. It's actually about taking stuff away. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Well, I want to go into a lot of this stuff. Like I said, a few topics from the book here, but I thought it's always fun to kind of paint the backdrop of Just Get Started and kind of some of your journey and some of the ways I find, I know we were talking before a little bit about our kids and I think we're so impressionable growing up and things that happen to us and how that changes our lives and the things we get into. So I thought it'd be fun to start maybe you painting a backdrop of your Just Get Started journey. And I thought a good place to start would be, can you tell me about the good citizen reward that you got when you were 16 years old and how that impacted your life going forward?
Yeah, the Good Citizen Award was my consolation prize for realizing I would be a terrible engineer. So I made the mistake of declaring to my parents that I wanted to be a playwright when I was in high school, and my dad, immigrant dad, decided that that probably wasn't a good career to make a lot of money, and suggested I try engineering camp instead. And so I spent a summer and I went to engineering camp for 3 weeks, and I realized that I was not cut out to be an engineer for multiple reasons. First, among which I just had no aptitude for it.
Yeah.
But during that time, I also realized that I was pretty good at interacting with people. And I kind of became the self appointed cruise director of this engineering camp. And I organized fun activities, open mic nights, caving, ultimate frisbee. I mean, all this kind of fun stuff. And at the end of it, I won what they called the Good Citizen Award. And I joke sometimes on stage that it was basically the engineering camp equivalent of Miss Congeniality.
Right.
But it taught me that I was pretty good at understanding people, and that maybe what I should do for a career involved understanding people and not so much being great at science.
Did you kind of let your dad specifically let him know maybe after that weekend or shortly after, like, I'm not going down the engineering path? Like, how did you broach that subject if that was such a thing that he wanted from you?
Now that I'm a dad, I think I understand that actually he wasn't really trying to push me to be an engineer. What he was trying to do was get me to not decide so quickly that I was going to do only one thing.
Mm.
And in that sense, it worked because I did not become a playwright. And now, as a dad, I try and get my boys to think the same way, which is you think you know exactly what you want to do, and you're a teenage boy, so you think you know everything.
Mhm.
But actually, maybe there's another side of this that you might see. And have become, as a result, a big advocate of students, and particularly in high school, but maybe even in college, doing internships that they hate,
Mhm.
because it teaches you something that you probably don't want to do. And that's great to learn when you're 16, 17, 18 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, it could change, but it tells you something about yourself. And I think that's really valuable.
Well, I agree with you because I actually was not teaching. I was talking to a eighth grade middle school class. They had like the career fair and whatever, and you bring in different
Yeah.
parents and whatever. So I got asked to come speak this year, and I definitely went off topic than everyone else. I didn't talk about a career. I talk about these ideas, and one of the things I brought up is similar to you. Is like you need to, at one, in eighth grade, you shouldn't know what your career is, right? There's so much to learn going up. But two, you need to go and actually talk with people that are in the profession you think you want to go toward. You want to go do internships. You want to even just shadow them for a little bit because you may end up getting into it and not liking it at all. So I totally agree with you. I think there's an opportunity we probably can do it different as a society of like, how do we get kids in that, first year or two, maybe after high school, thinking a little different than just going all in on one topic. And then all of a sudden they're maybe
Mhm.
screwed for many years. Right.
Well, I think there's that, and also equating what you learn in a classroom to what you might do for a career. I mean, I had a long, pretty successful career doing global marketing. And if I look back in my college transcript, the lowest grade I ever got was in the international marketing class. That was my lowest grade in all of college. It was the only D I ever got. So, I mean, if you look at that, you'd say, well, this guy's not cut out to do this thing. And yet here I am 25 years later looking back saying, well, that was the perfect thing for me. So sometimes the way you perform in that class that supposedly teaches that thing doesn't necessarily indicate maybe you might want to do that.
Yeah, you're right about that. Well, and I like, and this kind of parallels to what you were saying and the advice you give to your kids, but I liked how you mentioned this idea of you take the opportunity that is in front of you, not the one you're waiting for. And this idea that kind of sparked, I think, when you left college, you decided to move to Australia randomly, which was way outside your comfort zone. Can you share a little bit about that? Because that goes back to, I mean, really the book that we'll get into is that's non-obvious thinking. Most people would just take the first job that came their
Mhm.
way or something like that in terms of a career field. So I'm just kind of curious a little bit of how you thought about it at that time. And maybe do you think differently now?
Yeah, I always sort of had an aptitude, and I always had the desire to travel. I grew up traveling. I mean, I was born in India and I left when I was 9 months old because my dad got a job at the World Bank. And so we grew up traveling to a lot of different countries. I think by the age of 18, I'd been to 25 countries. I mean, I grew up really doing a lot of travel. And so moving to Australia seemed like a natural thing. I mean, they already speak English, so I didn't have to learn a new language, right? And when I moved there, I had no connections. I had no friends. I luckily did get my working visa, so I didn't have immigration as an issue. And I started applying for jobs, marketing jobs, and I got crickets, nothing. And the first job that I managed to land was a 3 week gig coding HTML. And this was in the year 1998. So, at that time we were hand coding stuff. We didn't have WordPress and, all this nice stuff. And my job interview consisted of a guy asking me if I had designed and coded my own personal website, which I had at that point myself. And I said yes. And he said, okay, you're hired for 3 weeks. And that 3 week gig coding, programming, basically, was not what I wanted to do for a career, but it was the opportunity I had and it was paying. And after those 3 weeks, they realized that maybe I'd be better as a project manager. And I got hired in a different job because at that point, my foot was in the door. And the lesson I took from that, which I sometimes talk about, is that sometimes you do take that thing that you don't want to do because it leads to something you might want to do. And in my case, it was a 3 week programming job.
Hmm. There's another lesson I'm thinking just from that story, and as it relates to like what we can call entrepreneurship or being able in an organization to kind of move around. Because I see a lot of folks that are stuck in an organization and they're like, well, I really like, so let's say they're in sales. I really want to go into marketing. And just it sparked because of what you just said is like, you built your own website. If you had not built your own website on randomly because you wanted that personal website, most likely you probably wouldn't have got hired because they saw you didn't have an experience. But just doing some things
Yeah.
outside the box, all of a sudden you now became more quote unquote employable because they saw that, even though it wasn't directly related to what you were doing. So how important is that, do you find, of like trying to build things on the outside, try to tinker, even if it's not in line with your day to day?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, it's so huge now that we have words for it. I mean, back in 1998, we didn't have any words for it. Now we call it personal branding. We call it a side hustle. I mean, there are terms to describe this now
Yeah.
that didn't exist 20 years ago when we just kind of did it on the side.
Why did you build a personal website at the time? Like 98 seemed to, that seemed
Yeah.
well before its years of that becoming a common thing.
Yeah, it sort of came out of my first failed entrepreneurial idea, which is I had this, what I thought was a brilliant idea in 1998 to build websites for restaurants. And the theory was people are starting to use the internet, they're starting to use Google. Why can't they find a restaurant to go to? And at that point, most restaurants didn't have websites. And so it was pretty new. And I went door to door to restaurants to try and convince them to pay me $250 so I could build a website for them. And all of them said the same thing, which is, why would we want a website? We don't even know what this is. Why do we care? And it failed. But in the process of launching that business, I had to teach myself how to make a website. And so I bought a book that was 500 pages that said, teach yourself HTML in a week. And I just went through the lessons and taught myself HTML in a
Wow.
week, and in order to start that business. And then once that business failed, I'm like, well, let me build my own website, because that way at least I knew I was moving to Australia. I figured maybe I could just send them a link to my website. That'd be a good way to maybe get a job.
Hmm. And the idea, I want to stick on this for a minute because you mentioned the word failure. Do you consider it though? I mean, based on your experience and thinking of all the things you've done, is that a failure or is it more just the only failure is if you quit? That's how kind of how I think of, like, you kept moving forward. If you didn't go through that, well, you're not getting to these next steps in life. How can that be helpful, I guess, for other folks? Because I find a lot of folks just get stuck on like, I don't want to try it because I may fail. But the reality is that's the only way you learn, right?
Yeah, I mean, you do learn from failure, but I mean, I don't agree with this whole give a trophy to everybody, even if you lost thing. So, like, if I describe a business idea as failing, it's because I wanted to make money on it and I didn't.
Okay.
I wanted to turn it into a business and it didn't work as a business. So, I mean, to me, that's a failure.
Yeah.
Now, did I learn something from that failure? Yeah, of course I did. And was it really valuable? And would I do it again? Yeah, I would. But I mean, it was a failed business, and let's not call it a success just because I learned something from it.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel you there. I mean, I guess it's kind of the nuance of how you want to define the terms, which is important, I guess. The definitions sometimes become
Mm.
important so the muddies or the water doesn't get muddy, I guess, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it's like this idea of like, uh, if something fails, it fails. If you move away from it, like I understand what you're saying. Like if you quit, which I did also, by the way, like that idea didn't work and I quit.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, like by your definition, it was a failure too because I quit. Like I let somebody else build those restaurant websites. Like at some point, someone got paid to build restaurant websites, and it wasn't me,
Mm.
right? So it's not like the business idea was wrong. I mean, all of those websites I mean, all those restaurants had a website at some point, right?
So I guess going through, because you've obviously had some successes in business. Yeah, now, don't you call yourself an accidental entrepreneur? Right?
Yeah, yeah, I sort of do, only because, I know a lot of entrepreneurs who are entrepreneurs at a young age,
Okay.
and I really became an entrepreneur in terms of running my own business and working for myself at kind of around the age of 40. So, that's much later. I was not the kid really, apart from a few things, selling a few things on eBay. I was not the kid at 18 years old who was starting his own business,
Mm.
or doing it successfully, at least I should say. I mean, I had the idea to do it, but then I pretty quickly pivoted and then I went and worked for somebody else for 15 years.
Can you help those? So let's help those folks in the 30s, early 40s, because I find different than talking to a 20-year-old that is just like, I'm just going to go out there and who cares because I can just land on my feet somewhere else. I have plenty of years. Someone that's in their 30s or 40s, they have a family, they got mortgage, they got all this stuff. That's where I find,
Mm.
something I've been kind of stuck in for a lot of years that it took me a long time to get out of. But a lot of folks are just struggling with that start of like, how do I actually take the leap? Can you share, like, how did you go from I work for someone to not? Was there a long period of like you had a plan in place, or was it kind of just you made the jump just one day? How did that work for you?
The jump was pretty sudden. I mean, at the point when I became an entrepreneur, we'd recently bought a house. I had a 6 year old and a 9 year old. So, I mean, I was in the middle of all that stuff, right? And I had I guess you could call it a side hustle. I mean, I'd written a couple of books while I was working at Ogilvy and Leo Burnett and these major ad agencies. And so, because of the books, I started getting invitations to go and speak. And then, as I became a better speaker, I started getting invitations to get paid to speak. And then I had this challenge, which is I'm working a full time job and I'm getting offers to be paid to do something on the side. And I didn't want to be sneaky about it. So I went to Ogilvy at that time and I said, look, people are going to pay me to be on stage. It's great for you because I'm on stage in front of potential clients, and they're going to pay. Like, can we somehow split it? Like, can I keep part of it and then you keep part of it? And the financial side of that was going to be so complicated that they said, look, we don't have a way of doing this. So why don't you just do what you want to do from a speaking point of view? And anytime you're speaking, just take a day off. That was the compromise. Take a day off. That way you're doing it on your own time and you can be paid and it's fine. And that worked up until it didn't, because Eventually, as you get better and better at speaking, you get bigger and bigger gigs, they book further in advance. And so now I was booking a talk in Korea 4 months from now, which obviously my calendar is open.
Mhm.
And then as the 4 month mark rolls up, we're in the middle of a big pitch. And I'm fully working on this pitch. And now I have a 3 day break because I need to go to Korea. And they're like, well, we need you. And I said, but I said yes to this thing 4 months ago. I got to go. And they said, no, but we need you here. Like you're a full time, right? I mean, reasonable, right?
Mhm.
And that conflict ended up becoming something that started to happen. And then we had real problems. And so at that point, it was like, all right, I can't do this job anymore.
Was there anything from a financial side? Like, did you have a number in your head? Well, well, let me ask first, maybe. Were you ever intending to leave? Meaning, if that could work out, like you could go travel to Korea, do the talk, and come back, work at Ogilvy, and do your day job. Did you ever have intentions to leave?
Uh, I was sort of feeling like I probably was going to leave at some point because the other thing is the advertising agency business. It may have changed, but I've heard from several people that it really hasn't. Is kind of a younger person's game, and when I say younger person, I mean under 40, not like just in your 20s. I mean, there's lots of people in 20s, 30s, but as you start to hit 40 and your kids get a little older, like unless you're the boss in the ad agency world, you sort of feel like everybody around me is kind of in a different phase of life.
Mhm.
So I was starting to feel that. No one ever said it. I mean, it's not like they said you're getting too old for this. I mean, it was never like that. But you kind of get the feeling of that, right? And also, I mean, I realized I was maybe more of an entrepreneur mentality wise because I started getting frustrated by this whole show up to work on Monday and they're like, by the way, we need you in San Francisco on Tuesday.
Mm,
And now it's like I was supposed to go to my kid's school. I was supposed to coach the soccer game. I can't do that because I have to this last minute travel. And I just started getting really frustrated that someone else was dictating my time.
mm. Yeah, that's a big. I think that's a big thing, right? Is that if you can't do what you need to do, and there's no flexibility, that becomes very, especially if you're a family person. I find obviously if you're fully workaholic, probably doesn't affect you, but if you're a family person and you keep ducking out on your kids, I mean that's not cool, and that eventually gets the
It's not the kind of dad you want to be. Like, that's not the kind of dad I wanted to be, right?
yeah. So let me go ask the question I was going to ask before I went back to that is, did you have like a financial number in mind? Obviously, you have two kids. You have you just moved to a new house. Did you have an idea of like, okay, if I start making this amount, I can leave the full time job? Did you have anything like that in place?
Uh, yes, to the first part of the question. So I did have a financial number in mind for what I wanted to make in the first year after leaving.
Mhm.
And it was basically my salary.
Okay.
So what I told myself is I'm going to take 1 year of being out on my own. And if I can make as much as I was making at Ogilvy with all the more flexibility, which I now have because I work for myself, I'm in a better situation because I'm making the same amount of money and I have a lot more free time. I have a lot more control over my schedule. So that was my target. And then I ended up making what I made in Ogilvy in the past year in the first 4 months that I was out on my own. And I was like, all right, I guess this is working.
Well, it's crazy because I've talked to a lot of folks in a similar position to you. Is like you don't realize like the handcuffs on you until you actually break free, and then you're like, oh my god, I have all this extra time. I can just like continue to fuel the fire. And eventually, like I said, you don't because I it's just weird. I'm going through this right now. Is this weird idea of like, okay, this is my salary now. Oh my god, am I going to make this on my own? And why can't I make
Right.
2 or 3x that? Like, why am I putting a cap on a number just because an employer pays me currently? And it's definitely some mental gymnastics I find. So I don't know if you went through that or maybe you
Mhm.
talk with people that go through that. Curious how you would maybe.
No, I mean, I think we all go through that, right? Because the other thing is, I mean, at least in the speaking business, if I book a gig that is 6 months from now, I don't actually get paid really. I mean, I get paid for half of it and then I have to wait.
Yeah,
So now you have this cash flow thing. There's no paycheck coming every 2 weeks.
yeah, true.
You got it's very inconsistent, right? So now you have to kind of manage that side of it too. So there's all these kind of multiple things. And then if you have a moment like the pandemic where you're a professional speaker and all your revenue comes from speaking and then all of a sudden there's no events at all for 2 years or there's no revenue there, now what do you do?
Hmm. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, then you're kinda stuck. It's like almost having figuring out a way to have multiple revenue streams in the unlikely event.
That was what saved me. Yeah, that was what saved me, that I had, already by that point launched as a second business a really successful book publishing company.
Yeah,
And that was great because during the time of the pandemic, everyone like me, who would typically be out there speaking, couldn't do it. And so they all said, well, I may as well write my next book because I'm stuck at home anyway.
yeah.
And so the publishing business really took off.
Well, last question on that, and you kinda led to it talking about Idea Press because you co-founded that with your wife, correct?
I did, yes.
How important was the support at home from her when you're making this again, hey, I want to start speaking, I'm traveling with that, I'm still doing my full-time job and I want to leave. I'm just kind of curious the dynamics there of like having that person and maybe what she did well to help support you in that decision as well as the transition.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I had a lot of support at home because not only was she there, but we live close to family. My parents are close by as well. So we had a lot of family support, which was great. And then I also think that just the way that we have been working together. I mean, a husband and wife team running a business isn't always a recipe for success. Like sometimes it creates
Yeah.
tension that maybe you don't necessarily need in your marriage. But we have very different skill sets. And the fact that I'm going out and doing these things at events and I'm out there and then I'm coming back, like we have a good complementary skills that way. And so I think that works. And actually, she's an author now too. She launched a children's book, a kid's book about Diwali, which is a big Indian, South Asian holiday. And so now she's in that world too, but different because she's launched a kid's book and, I'm doing business books.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was going to ask you about that. We'll have to take that offline. I'm publishing my third children's book. It comes out in a couple months, and yeah, so it's
Oh, cool.
yeah, yeah. She'd be cool to talk with as well. Just kind of her path and how she decided to publish and go about that.
Yeah, it'd be really good. I mean, so she's published by a group that's owned by Penguin Random House. So we did not publish her book because we don't do children's
Okay.
books. So we're a publisher,
Yeah.
but we only do business books. And so now she's working with a different publisher, and we have this whole sort of, well, we would have done it this way, and they're doing it this way, and they're way slower than we are. And so, like, how do we deal with that? It's like a very traditional publishing versus independent hybrid, faster.
Has that given you an idea to have a children's book arm to your publishing company?
Uh, you may not. I mean, people listening may not think so, but it is actually very different in terms of the way that they're sold in, who you sell them to, the manner of which you sell them, the types of authors you work with. So, no, we're not looking to expand into any other category but what we do really well, which is business and nonfiction.
Yeah, I love that. Carve your path and like go headstrong into that. I mean, sometimes
Yeah, I mean, we know what we're really good at, and I don't want to distract from that.
yeah. Well, I think I mean, that's probably a good lesson though, just from the just get started mentality of we have this one focused idea, and then all of a sudden these new opportunities we were talking about earlier, they creep in and we're like, oh, I want to do that. I want to do that. And then what happens is you start to drain the tank because it's 100%. So the 100% has to be divvied up one way or another. Do you go to 100% all in, or do you have 10% in 10 different buckets? And it's definitely a tough, juggle once you start
Mhm.
getting more opportunities. I think once you get more success, would you agree? Then all of a sudden the new opportunities come. It's like, what I actually have to say no if I want to keep down this one path, right?
Totally. I mean, not only are there new opportunities that come that take you in a different direction, but there's more opportunities in the direction you're already going. I mean, I probably have to decline with kindness 85, 90% of the pitches for books that we get to publish with us that are in our category. Not even things that are saying, oh, I have a cookbook. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like good business nonfiction authors who want to publish with us that I currently say no to. So it's even difficult there to keep focus.
What are some of the qualifiers you use to like either say, well, we're going to take another look at you, or we will get the pass?
I look at a couple things. I look at the originality and necessity for the idea to exist in the world. I look at the author and whether he or she is the perfect person to write this book. And then I look at the urgency of the idea. Like, could this book have been written 3 years ago? Is it too early? Those are probably the first three things that I look for. in terms of an author that we want to publish.
Okay, that's a good. Yeah, I like that. What I guess, and I want to jump in. There's a couple of cool ideas for concepts from your book, but I guess kind of the last point on that. Let's say someone's listening in that does want to write, and we're not going to do a 5 hour, webinar here on how to write a book. But like, what would be maybe an encouragement for them to think about if they're starting their writing journey? Any resources? Any kind of way to direct them forward?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, first of all, be honest with yourself about whether you're a writer, whether you love to write, because there are a lot of people who have a great concept for a book, but the idea of sitting down for 8 hours and writing would be absolute torture for them. And so, what that means is you need a writing partner, and which is fine. I mean, lots of great books have writing partners that help a book get out there, but you have to be honest with yourself about where you are from a writing perspective. The other thing I would say is I spent a lot of time. People ask me all the time because I have kind of a unique background when it comes to publishing, because I did my first two books traditionally with large publishers where we got the advance. I used a literary agent.
Mhm.
Then I self published a book. Then I went and started my own independent publishing company. So I've published a book every way you can publish a book
Yeah,
personally. And now I've learned a lot about the publishing industry. And so I actually put together a collection of videos that kind of shares everything that I know about publishing.
Mhm.
And I called it the Non Obvious Crash Course to Book Publishing and Marketing. So there's like 50 videos there on everything you could ever imagine. So if somebody is listening and they want to deep dive into publishing, I'll share the link with you and you can share it in the show notes. It's basically me interviewing all these people about finding great editors, getting a cover done, how to find a publisher, how to get media for your publisher, how to get book reviews, how to get on the bestseller list. I mean, everything that you could possibly want to know about publishing, I tried to include.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, that's great. Yeah, please share the link, and I'm sure that'd be helpful for some folks. And I will just to kind of underscore what you said about. I think this comes down to like prioritization and like what we really want to do. And I'll share a personal experience of what I'm going through right now because I was in the shoes like over the last few years, like, oh, I want to write a personal like self development book, and kind of listening to all these people like Stephen Pressfield and all these people that I just admire. And I felt like, oh my God, I got to wake up at 6 a.m. or I got to write 3,000 words today or all this stuff. And what I decided to do, and this is just kind of again, we'll keep talking about being non-obvious of like, okay, how do I work? How do I want to do it? And I've prided
Yeah.
myself on consistency and just chopping wood slowly but surely. So what I've done, and now I guess I'm on week 34. Every single week for this entire year, I've only said I'm committing to 500 words. That's all I have to write is 500 words a week. But you know what, Rohit, and you can probably do the math in your head. I'm at almost 20 I now because I've written over 500 words some weeks. I'm at like 26,000 words already. And we're, whatever, recording this,
Mhm.
here late summer. So I'm on my path to get the book done by the end of the year. Obviously, I got to edit it and do all that stuff. But I think that's maybe for folks listening in, like you don't have to do it how everyone else does it, but you do have to find what works for you and then kind of just craft that into your day somehow instead of just keep pushing it down the line at least. So that'd just be my encouragement for folks to think about
Yeah.
that way. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, just to give them the alternate perspective, what you just described is an awesome way to do it. And it would also never work for me.
Yeah.
I couldn't do that. And I tried. I tried to write every day and it just, it didn't work. So I actually collect ideas. I use post-it notes. I use storyboarding, and then I write in sprints. So I'll write 12, 15,000 words in one day.
Yeah.
Because I spent all this time kind of crafting what I wanted to write and I figured out what the different lessons would be, and then I'll crank it out. And that works for me to write in that way with sprints.
Yeah.
So you're right. People need to find their own way that works for them and then not listen to what works for everybody else.
Exactly. And just to clarify, in case I misspoke, I'm doing 500 words a week. So it's only per week. So for me, it was like, how do I do the smallest amount, but still keep moving down
Yeah.
the path? But again, I think this is where, yeah, it's important to find what works for you. And it's good to, I think, see what other people are doing and then take those things potentially and be like, oh, okay, I like that, but let me tweak here. Let me do it this way. So, and work it into our lives. Um, okay. Non-obvious thinking. Now, we can make an assumption of what this means, but I want to hear from your mouth. What is non-obvious thinking? What is in layman's terms, what is that for people?
Yeah, it's this idea that we all have the capacity to see those things that we ordinarily might miss or ignore. But in order to see them, and in order to have better ideas and more creativity, we have to be intentional about opening space to actually see them. So the book is about how to do that, to improve your ideas, to improve your thinking, to be more disruptive and more creative.
Yeah. And like I said, I love the book. As I went through, there's always different parts of books that hit you and like, oh, wow, I like that here, or that's interesting there. There was a few that I really picked up because these are things I've even tried, and then some obviously that opened my mind a little bit. So I'm going to hit a couple of these, and I just want you to kind of give your take on maybe how this could help people in the lens of getting started, right? Thinking differently. So you talk about this
Okay.
idea of creating space, which I think is so valuable. So give me an idea. Maybe it's an anecdote for people that, thinking of creating space in their life to open up to non-obvious thinking. What would you share?
Yeah, one of the things that I have started doing in events, and I call these oasis moments, it's the idea that no matter how crowded something is, no matter how busy your day is, or how many people there are around, there's always a way to create what you could call an oasis moment for yourself, a moment when you can actually think and reflect on what's going on around you. So, one example would be instead of starting your meeting at 9 o'clock, you start at 9:05. And the first 5 minutes are for reflection. Nobody talks, nobody says anything, or maybe people only come to the meeting 5 minutes later. So you actually have a little time to get ready for it mentally, right? One of the things we started doing at events is we started hosting what we called the non obvious 7 minute meetup.
Hmm.
And it was for 7 minutes. And the idea was that we all go to meetups, and people generally hate meetups and networking because it means that you have to be this sort of alpha person that goes and introduces yourself, and you have to have your short pitch for, like, what do you do in the world? And like, am I compelling? Do I have like as good of a pitch as I could have? And there's a lot of pressure to exchange information and try and make the right connections with the right people, especially if you happen to be starting out your career or looking for a job or looking for more work. And it's like there's a lot of baggage that goes with it. And our 7 minute meetup was meant to try and remove some of that by giving people a very easy way to connect with someone new without having to be that type A personality. And the way was that you would go to an event and you would ask someone, what's something non obvious about you? And then you would answer that question to them and share something non obvious about yourself. And what we found is the more people did that, the less they spoke about my job is this, my city that I live in is this, I have X number of kids. And they got to something a little bit more personal, which meant that they connected with one another on a little bit of a deeper level. And that was our chance to create these oasis moments, to let people connect more deeply and then try and give them a way to do that more quickly.
Hmm.
So I think that's one way of creating space for yourself. You don't need special training in order to do this. You just need to be intentional about, okay, I'm going to carve out this period of time to go and do this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of getting out of your old ways of like, I only do it this way and this is status quo, and like finding, like, even I found this, I've done this more recently, is I used to, like, I'll go walk around my block, right? It's like a 20-minute loop, really nice, but I'm always listening to like a podcast. And what I've done recently is, I don't do it every time, but I'll just leave the headphones at home and I'll just walk with no podcast in my ear. And it's amazing. You just start thinking, and you observe and you see
Yeah.
things and you hear the sounds, and it's just like, it's different, and it's kind of uncomfortable a little bit because you're so used to having a thing in. But I think that's how I took it too, from like creating space, is like getting outside your norm and just seeing some different, the world from a different lens, I guess is the best way to say it. So I like the oasis moment for sure. Um, what kind of leads, and you mentioned the event stuff, it kind of leads this other thing, and this has been one of the most impactful things for me in my life, especially this entrepreneurial journey, is finding the right room and not being
Mm,
so stuck in what we were just talking about. So how do you think about
yeah.
finding the right room, or maybe an encouragement to get people to maybe try a different way of doing things and getting with the right people that they don't really know are the right people at this time?
Yeah, I think part of it, finding the right room. I mean, there's a lot of cliches around this, right? I mean, people say, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Like there is that kind of way of thinking about the room.
Yeah.
But when I think about like find your way to these rooms, part of it is trying to break out of the room you're supposed to be in. So, for example, there are rooms and networking activities that you might get invited to because you work in a particular industry, right? There might be things you're invited to because you're the alumni of a particular school. Those are the rooms that you're supposed to be in, and you should absolutely say yes because you might meet somebody new and different. The rooms that are unexpected to go to are the networking event for an industry that isn't your industry, right?
Right.
Or you go along as a guest for someone to a school you didn't go to, or maybe crash the party if you can.
Right.
I mean, the idea is that there are places, there are rooms that you're not necessarily supposed to be in, but if you believe in what they believe in, right, then you can make a great statement, and you can actually stand out as well. I mean, I've gone to more than my fair share of networking events, or been invited even as a secondary speaker
Mhm.
to an event that was focused on women in business. I'm clearly not a woman in business, but I support women in business, and I wanted to share that message, and I stand out because I'm one of the few males that actually showed up and that stayed and that listened. I didn't just do my thing on stage and leave. I actually stuck around. And what that says to people is that you're there to learn as much as you are to share what you know. And I think that is something people notice.
Do you like, because I love the idea. I find that people that maybe haven't pushed outside that fear of like, well, I'm not like, let's say they're in marketing. Well, it's not a marketing conference. I can't go to, whatever, some random conference. What is like an easy way in? Is that just like going to play like I'm thinking like locally, like, okay, I never played pickleball, but all right, I'm gonna go there because it's low entry. No one knows me, but at least it's out of my comfort zone. Like, I'm curious if there's anything to get people, like, what's step A to get them moving forward if they don't want to go to the big conference they're not comfortable with.
I would say find the venue first and not the conference. So wherever you live, there's probably some sort of a big hotel or conference center, and they're hosting a bunch of different events. You can easily find out online what the schedule of events is. Many of them have expo halls, they have people walking around. So you don't even necessarily have to go with the intention of meeting people.
Mhm.
You could just go with the intention of learning something and show up to some of these expos. Many of them have free expos, right? And some industries have done a better job of explaining it,
Mhm.
right? So we all know we could go to the auto show in wherever we are, where you don't have to be in the auto industry. We just go and check out cars. A lot of conferences have things like that for people to go and just check out what their industry is, but we don't go and take advantage of it usually. So sometimes the right room is something you just don't know anything about.
Yeah, that's true. I like that local venue. That's true because there's our hotels, there's areas nearby where they're hosting random stuff all the time. So don't go crash a wedding, probably, but go.
Yeah.
we- we-
Yeah, that's probably, inadvisable.
Um, two more on here. One, and I like this idea of the adding constraints. And I was going to ask you because when I think of constraints, it could be a lot of things. You can think of it from a development side or productivity. Are there ways that you add constraints in your life to kind of make sure you stay in line versus, maybe getting unfocused, like we were talking about earlier?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest constraint you can add, pretty readily to anything is time. And people are starting to do that even with social media use, right? You have these apps that will track, like, okay, you've been on Instagram for 20 minutes. Do you still want to be on Instagram?
Right.
Or is that long enough for today, or whatever your number is, right? So I think those types of constraints are really valuable, because they help you to not spend too much time doing something. I think there's also creative constraints. So anyone who is a designer or does design work will tell you that it is much harder to design something with a vague brief
Right.
than it is to design something with a tight brief, with a clear idea of what you're actually looking for. So that's an example of a designer, somebody who arguably is in one of the most creative roles you can be in, saying, please give me some constraints because it will help me be more creative, not less creative.
Yeah. Yeah, the running I used to be in well, I guess you could, in the software business that sold to creative and marketing teams. And it was so funny because I got to know a lot of these creative folks, these designers, and they would always joke about, and you probably went through this with a marketing background, like probably like, oh, make it pop, or like like they give these like vague, and it's like I don't really know what do I do with that? What does that mean? And to your point, yeah,
Mhm.
giving more specific actually makes it simpler, makes it easier. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, you gotta put some sort of guidelines around it if you really wanna get something that fits what you want.
Yeah. And I think it's and I do probably put it in the category of like non-obvious because I think for most of us, we think like more options better. Like the more it's the whole, whatever paradox of choice. Like, oh, I have 50 options, that's better. Well, no, actually it's probably better to have two and it's a little easier to
Mhm.
pick there, right? So I mean, I definitely agree with that. I think the constraints could be absolutely massive for us to going back to what we said earlier, stay focused on one avenue versus being distracted into a million different, you know, areas that we could go. Um,
Mhm.
Find option C. Again, I love this. It kind of reminded me this book, The Third Door, and this idea of like
Mhm.
finding like there's not obviously we're in political times now. There's like red and blue. There's you have these left and right, but the reality is there's other options if you really open up. So how do you think about option C, or maybe how should people think about option C for them getting started?
Yeah, I think the first, rule of finding option C is not accepting that options A and B are the only choices. Um, I mean, maybe that's obvious
Yeah.
in the name option C, but it does require a little bit of a mindset shift because when you're presented with an either or choice,
Mhm.
your inclination would be to say, "Well, I want this or that," and not, "What else could I do? What else could I have?" But sometimes finding option C can be a blend of those two things. And in the book, we write about the example of the futon, which is a bed and a couch, right? And it was really born from this idea that sometimes you kind of need an extra bed, but not all the time.
Mhm.
So what are you going to do? Keep a mattress there just in case?
Right.
Kind of inconvenient. And most of the time, you want a couch, and every once in a while, you want it to be a bed. And sleeping on the couches kind of feels like you're just a visitor, like
Right.
you're not a welcome guest, right? I mean, you could sleep on a couch. We've all slept on couches at some point, right? But if you want to welcome somebody, you don't make them sleep on a couch, you give them a bed. So the futon was kind of the perfect combination of those, and that is an option C. That's an example. So in that case, you're not accepting that it's only this or that. You're saying, well, maybe I can invent something that would kind of be both.
Yeah. Yeah, I do like that because I think again, a lot of our world is that either or. It's this way or this way. And I think and this goes back to and this is why I love how these kind of all come together is if we create space for ourselves, right? If we the reason I love the find the right room stuff is like if we're only around the same people hearing the same thing, the echo chambers, right? And if we're stuck in the way, we never have a chance to think outside the box. We never have a chance to kind of be pushed and prodded on our ideas. So, anyways, that's why I love
Mhm.
kind of how these concepts like weave together to help us think differently. Obviously, um, someone reads this book, Rohit, what are you hoping they take away from this? Is there an action you want them to take? Is there just an idea to, continue to push their life forward? What's the hope for you?
I hope that people find at least one idea for something that they can easily do. This is not meant to be a theory book. It's not meant to be a shift the way you see the world type of book. Maybe people will get that from it,
Mhm.
but it's really meant to be like, what is the one small thing I can do differently today? Like, what is the hack? What is the shortcut? And I don't typically use those words, but I do think that especially authors, we sometimes minimize how important those are. Like if you say to an author, "Oh, you wrote a book about hacks," a lot of authors are offended by that.
Yeah,
Like, "No, I wrote a big idea book. Like this is much bigger than that." I don't think that. I mean, I do think there's a big idea behind this. The world does need more non-obvious thinkers, and this book is meant to inspire that. But at the end of the day, there's 24 short chapters. There's two action items for things you can do differently tomorrow in each one, which means this book is literally 48 tips. So like one of those has got to resonate for you in terms of something you could do differently in your day to be a non-obvious thinker. And that's the style of book this is. I mean, that's why there's illustrations. That's why it's super short to read. That's why it's that small format. Like all of it is meant to be very digestible.
well, that leads us where I kind of always like to end this podcast on is, something actionable, something tangible people can take. Because I think we can get stuck in thinking all day long. Is there something you would
Mhm.
encourage folks, and maybe from the book, maybe something just different that's on your mind, but something like a challenge, an action, maybe a question they should give themselves to move and get started in the right direction tomorrow? Or I guess maybe today.
Yeah, I mean, it could be it could be either. I would say one of the things is adapt a experimentation mindset. And to me, what that means is that when you hear about something, and we all hear about stuff, new stuff that we haven't heard about before, you try it. You don't just hear about it and think, "Oh, that's, cool," and then you never do anything. So, if you've heard about ChatGPT but you've never tried it, which is a lot of people, more than you would expect, actually try it. Try it for yourself. If you go to a restaurant and you look down the menu and you see an item that you've never heard of, order it. I mean, we all have a chance to do something new, do something different, break our routines a little bit. And I think the experimentation mindset is kind of about that. Go to an unusual event, eat an unusual food, try something different that you haven't tried before, because it creates these new mental pathways for you to say, well, now I can be innovative. Like, I don't feel like that every day because I feel like maybe I'm doing the same thing. My schedule is the same. I'm kind of stuck in this routine, but you can break yourself out of that. And I think it's important to do that because that is the first step towards having better, bigger, more non obvious ideas.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's at the end of the day, what's the worst that could happen from ordering something if you didn't like it on the menu? Like, it's such a low, I mean, seriously, it's like a low effort. Like, I mean, it should be low stress for anyone doing those type of things. So I agree, and it gets you in that mindset, as you're saying, like you're thinking differently. It's kind of almost being like a skeptic a little bit of like, wait a minute, this has always been how I've thought. What if I think a little differently? Wait, can I look at that problem a little different way? And all of a sudden it starts bubbling into like, well, wow, I'm looking at the world in an entirely different spot today than I did a year ago, just because of these small little experience or experiments, right? I mean, I think that's a
Mhm.
where you want to get. One leads to the second one, and all of a sudden, now you're asking these questions all over every day, right?
Yeah, you're sort of tricking yourself, and there's many examples of people, behavioral science also, that points to this idea that like if you commit to doing one push up a day, which is nothing, now you start to get more active and you start to tell your mind, and maybe you start doing more than one push up a day, and now you start to adapt a new habit and it becomes part of your life. And now you didn't used to work out and now you do work out. Like, these are the ways that these things start, and science has shown us that over and over again. And so we can take those sorts of steps with everything, not just working out, to challenge ourselves to think in a different way. And that's what I hope people take from the book.
Mm. Well, as I said, I think it's a great book. I think it's a short read to the point. I think a lot of people are going to get some value out of it. So I appreciate you writing it, and appreciate you coming on here and sharing a little bit of your journey and some things they can expect from the book. Rohit, where can people say hello to you online? Any spot you like to gather in the watering holes?
Yeah, the easiest spot would be nonobvious.com. You can learn all about all the different things that we have, including this book. And if you want to connect with me personally, just my personal website, which I've had since the Australia days that we talked about, although the design's evolved since then, at rohitbhargava.com, just my full name.com.
Awesome. Rohit, thank you so much for joining, man. This is a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.